So, say you've been playing Tableturf for a while and you think you have a pretty good grasp on building decks. So, you open a new pack of cards, you pick out some cards you really like, and you built a whole new deck and you love this deck, but then when you play against real people at higher levels, it just isn't doing what you want it to. Why? So, I already showed you guys how to build a deck and how to play a deck, but in this video, I want to walk you through my process of designing, testing, and improving your deck using some of the tools I learned from Six Sigma. And I know that sounds really sus, but bear with me. If you have a job at a big company or if you work in a warehouse, you may have heard of process improvement philosophies and tools like 5S, Lean, Kaizen, or Six Sigma. Six Sigma specifically is about the reduction of mistakes, the removal of the causes of those mistakes, the minimizing of variability, and continuous improvement. I think all of those things are important and applicable to Tableturf. And I know the name Six Sigma is really stupid, but apparently it refers to how the Greek letter sigma is used to represent standard deviation and how most of a bell curve is within 3 standard deviations of the mean on each side. So there's 6 sigmas? I don't know, it's so dumb. But anyway, the reason I'm making this video is kind of weird and a long story, but what happened was recently I went in for a job interview for a job that I really wanted, and I nailed the first 2 interviews, but I didn't make it to the top 2 of the final selection process because the other guy was 5S and Six Sigma and Lean certified, and the interviewers really like that, so he got picked over me to move on to the final interview. I did not, and I was so mad and so upset that I looked up all the stuff and signed up for a bunch of classes so next time I would have the most impressive resume. But anyway, the lessons were super boring, and while I was taking notes, I was mostly just thinking about how badly I wanted to play Tableturf and how some of the stuff I'm learning doesn't even apply to me because I don't even have the resources as a contracted associate to carry out these big projects at work. But anyway, we got to the chapter about demake improvement cycle, and I was like, yeah, I can use this. So keep in mind that I am not an expert on Six Sigma or demake, and I have an admittedly shaky grasp on these concepts and ideas, but I just wanted to show you how I integrated demake into how I specifically change my decks, and if this is helpful for you, that's just a cool bonus. But anyway, demake stands for define, measure, analyze, improve, and control, and I don't really like that at all, so I have come up with the equally stupid acronym OAAIE, which I think is more descriptive. But before we get into this, I would recommend you familiarize yourself first with the types of Tableturf terms, or as I call them, table terms, as collected by Sir Nerdbird, and the types of cards as described by in Soup Cup by Cobalt from the TBS Discord as well. Both documents can be found in the resource channel of the TBS Discord, which is linked below, and you should definitely join and support us. But please read all the rules first, or you'll make me look like a goon in there. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's go through each phase and how they apply to deck improvement. So the O stands for observe patterns. Basically in this phase, what I do is I try to figure out what recurring problem is happening with my deck. So for you to do this, you're going to have to play a bunch of games with that deck. I would start by having someone else observe you playing with that deck, and they just might be able to tell you exactly what you're doing wrong, and then you can skip this entire video. But if not, you might have to do some investigating yourself. If possible, record a few of your games and try to see just what keeps happening that is causing you to lose. If you can't record your gameplay, that's fine. You can also write down your observations, but it's just going to be a little harder because you can't rewind and see it again and again and again. But anyway, for example, maybe you notice that you're always drawing way too many small cards and getting blocked in your zone. Maybe you're always drawing too many big cards and bricking early on. Maybe you just aren't building enough special or using it too early and you're unable to play your 312 on your last turn and it keeps happening. But once you figure out whatever the problems are, you can start figuring out a cause and a solution. Alright, you figured out your problem and you really want to make this deck work. If you are not super attached to this deck, I would just rebuild and try again. But if you're really attached to this deck, you can start to move on to the next phase. So A stands for assemble data. In this phase, you want to collect as much data as you can regarding your problem now that you've figured out what your problem is. So how I do this is I make a list of all the cards in the deck, and then keep a count over the course of 10 games or so how often this problem happens and with what cards. So yeah, you got to play more games with this deck. I hope you're attached to this deck. So ideally you want to play against real people, but if your friends just don't want to play Tableturf with you, you can always join the TBS pool and ping the looking for a game role in the Discord. If you want to just play against CPUs, I don't really recommend it because all of them are pretty weak, but if you must play against CPUs, I would suggest the following for each map. So we've got Fry on Main Street, Big Man for Thunder Point, Cuttlefish for X Marks, and if you have the DLC, Spike for Square Squared if you have them, but if you don't, Mr. Coco is okay too. Jalonzo for Lakefront if you have him, but my next choice would be Harmony, Shelly for Double Gemini if you have her, but Lil Judd is also pretty okay, Marie for River Drift, and Fred Crumbs on box seats if you have him. So as you play, you want to create a count or a tally for each card and your goals. So here's an actual deck I was working on recently. This isn't enough data, I've only played 5 games, but what happened was I felt that it was too chunky, I couldn't play cards, and then it didn't build special efficiently enough. So for each game, every time that I was able to play an actual card, I gave the card a point. Every time that I was able to activate a special with a card, I gave that card a point per special it activated. But yeah. Back to our examples, your deck that bricks often. What cards are usually playable or unplayable? Keep a count of all those cards and like what cards you're able to play and what cards you don't. You may find that one of those cards you played only once out of 10 games. Or the deck that can't build enough special. Keep a count on what cards you use to gain those special points and what cards never build special. But then keep in mind other factors will come into this. Like just because a card never builds special doesn't mean it's bad. It could just have another purpose. This is where the analyze phase comes in. I didn't change this one because I really like the wording of these ones. So now that you have your data, you can start to figure out what is happening and why. So I would first like to refer again to Soup Cup and how you might want to categorize your cards by purpose first. Like, are you able to play your openers as openers? Are your comboers actually comboing? Are you actually poking with your pokers? Like, your playstyle just might not be compatible with certain strategies, but if you have a card that has a specific purpose and then you never use it for that purpose, you might want to consider changing that card. So, back to my examples, the deck with the unplayable cards, you now have your categorized cards, and you can see that you have 7 openers for some reason, and only 3 of them were able to be played as openers consistently or other purposes, while you consistently passed on the other 4 because they were too big at certain points on certain maps. Or the deck that doesn't build enough special, you should now have a list of all your comboers and see that maybe one card in particular is really terrible at building special because it doesn't mesh with your deck well. You've now identified the potential cause. It might not be the cause, but now you have something to test. So make a list of just everything that you've noticed with your data there, and you can start working on it a little more. So on my deck, my comboers sure comboed, so they're good. I just might have to be more aware of building specials, like it might just be a gameplay issue. My openers didn't gain a lot of special, but that's because they're openers. I played them all a lot, except for Steelhead, so that's the card that I would try to swap out of this deck. So to recap, you figured out your problem, you gathered data on your problem, and then you figured out what and why it's happening. In this phase, you're actually going to start changing the cards. I'm keeping the name as improved because I like that one too. So you can now address the issues that you uncovered in the analyze phase. As you swap cards, I would keep in mind the curve of your deck and maybe try to align your deck to a favorable soup cup ratio. In my examples, the deck that bricks a lot, you figured out that you have too many openers that you can't even play. So I would see where my deck is deficient and replace the unplayable openers with the soup cup letter that you're lacking in. Maybe I'll swap some of these openers for smalls or for pokers that won't be too big to play in the late game. For the deck that doesn't combo well, we identified that problem card, so now we can take a look at the cards we want to keep, maybe see what combos well with those. There's a list out there, I think. And then just figure out what card would mesh well with your other comboers. The experiment phase is where we test out your changes. So yeah, you're going to have to play a lot more games. Just continue to monitor and track the performance of these cards and if they work better or worse than the cards you had before. I track all of my changes in Google Sheets and evaluate all changes as they're made. So if it works, good. If the problem persists, maybe try something else, or you can always just revert your deck to how it was before and investigate another problem. I evaluate my decks in this stage by playing a mix of CPUs and real people because they play very differently. But anyway, in our example decks, the brick deck, is it still bricking as much, or can you actually play cards now? Is something worse happening, like you're not able to get good openers? Just keep the demake or OAAIE cycle going until you eliminate a lot of your problems. As for me and my river deck, the one where I only had five games for the example, I figured out that it wasn't the unplayable Steelhead's fault. I was just playing it wrong, so I adjusted my other cards around it, and that deck kept me afloat in the loser's bracket for way longer than I thought it would. In last week's Duel-On, it was crazy. That same deck took me to 3rd place in today's Tableturf Battle Open, number 10, where I played River Drift 9 times. And what sent me to the losers bracket in the first place was my many other terrible decks, which are just so broken I might have to employ another improvement tool called DMADV, but that's a different video for another time. But yeah, that's how I improve my decks, and I hope this video was helpful, and if not, too bad. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you next time. Ooh, side note. If you are an adult, I highly recommend you get Six Sigma certified because it's free in some places and it's really easy to get your work to pay for it. And when the time comes, you will have the most impressive resume, or you will have the best justification for a raise, or you will be the most well-equipped for a difficult project that will get you promoted. If you're a high schooler or younger though, before you jump into Six Sigma, I would recommend you first learn everything you can about Excel, because like I unironically love using Excel and I treated it as a hobby since elementary school, and that has made me really valuable in my job, and it'll make an empty baby resume look way better. So get to learning, everybody. I hope you have fun learning stuff and then playing Tableturf. Alright, see you for real now. Bye.